The gunshot that shattered the morning silence sent Theresa Jane scrambling from the general store's back room, her threadbare cotton dress offering little protection against the bitter January wind that howled through Winslow, Arizona, in 1883. She pressed herself against the wooden storefront, watching two men on horseback thunder past, their faces obscured by bandanas, stolen money bags bouncing against their saddles. The cold bit through her clothes with vicious teeth, making her whole body shake violently as she hugged herself, trying to preserve what little warmth remained in her bones. Her employer, old Mr. Henderson, had sent her outside to sweep the front steps just moments before the robbery occurred, and now she stood frozen in more ways than one, watching the chaos unfold. The bank across the dusty street had its door hanging open, and she could hear shouting from inside. Her fingers had gone numb, her lips were turning blue, and her teeth chattered so hard she thought they might crack. She had arrived in Winslow just 3 weeks ago with nothing but the clothes on her back and desperate hope in her heart, fleeing from St. Louis, where her father's gambling debts had threatened to swallow her whole. "Miss, you need to get inside." The voice was deep, rough like gravel under wagon wheels, but something in its tone made her look up instead of obeying immediately. The man standing before her was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders wrapped in a heavy sheepskin coat. His hat shadowed most of his face, but she could see a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of dark stubble, and eyes the color of aged whiskey that looked at her with genuine concern. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with the weathered appearance of someone who spent most of his life outdoors. I just. Theresa tried to speak, but her jaw wouldn't cooperate, the shivering making her words come out in broken fragments. She was 19 years old and had faced plenty of hardships in her short life, but this cold was unlike anything she had experienced in Missouri. The high desert winter was unforgiving, especially to someone wearing nothing more substantial than a dress meant for summer work. The man, whose name she would soon learn was Yates Morgan, did not hesitate. He shrugged out of his coat in one smooth motion and draped it over her shoulders before she could protest. The warmth that enveloped her was immediate and overwhelming, bringing tears to her eyes. The coat still held his body heat, and it smelled of leather, wood smoke, and something distinctly masculine that she could not quite identify but found oddly comforting. "You cannot give me your coat," she managed to say through chattering teeth, even as she instinctively pulled it tighter around herself. "You will freeze. I've got more layers than you, and I have been riding since dawn. My blood is warm." His mouth quirked up at one corner, not quite a smile but close. Besides, a man who lets a woman freeze when he can prevent it is not much of a man at all. "I do not even know you," Theresa said, but she made no move to return the coat. She could not, even if propriety demanded it. The cold had seeped so deep into her bones that she feared she might actually perish without this protection. "Yates Morgan," he said, touching the brim of his hat in a gesture that was somehow both casual and respectful. "I work the cattle ranches north of here, though I am in town today because my boss needed supplies and someone to deposit the earnings from our last cattle drive." He jerked his chin toward the bank. "Looks like I arrived at an inconvenient time." "Theresa Jane," she replied, finally able to speak more clearly as warmth began to seep back into her body. "I work at Henderson's general store, or at least I did until about 5 minutes ago when I might have abandoned my post. Given the circumstances, I think Henderson will forgive you." Yates moved slightly, positioning himself between her and the wind. She realized he was deliberately blocking the worst of it, using his body as a shield. The gesture touched something deep in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the borrowed coat. The sheriff and his deputies were emerging from the bank now, looking frustrated and angry. One of them, a heavy-set man with a drooping mustache, was shaking his head. "They got clean away," he announced to the gathering crowd. "Took nearly $3,000. Yates let out a low whistle. "That is a considerable sum." "It is the ranchers' money mostly," the sheriff said, his gaze sweeping over the onlookers and landing on Yates. "Morgan, is that you? Your boss is inside having a fit. They got the deposit you were supposed to make." "I was not supposed to make it until this afternoon," Yates said calmly, but Theresa saw his jaw tighten. "The money is still in my saddlebag, locked up at the livery." "Well, that is one piece of good news today." The sheriff moved on, barking orders to his men about forming a posse. Theresa watched Yates carefully. His hand had moved instinctively to where a gun would rest on his hip, though she noticed he was not wearing one at the moment. There was a tension in his shoulders that had not been there before, a coiled readiness that suggested he was no stranger to danger. But when he looked back at her, his expression softened. "You are still shaking," he observed. "I am much better now, thanks to you." She was indeed feeling more human, though her feet were still blocks of ice in her worn boots. "I should return to work. You should get properly warm first." Yates glanced at the general store, then back at her. "Henderson's has a stove in the back, does it not? Go sit by it for a while. I need to go check on my horse and that money anyway, but I will come back for my coat later." He paused, and something flickered in those whiskey-colored eyes. "If that is acceptable to you." Theresa found herself nodding before she could think better of it. Yes, that would be acceptable. She watched him walk away, his long stride eating up the distance to the livery stable, and only then did she realize she was still clutching his coat around her shoulders like a lifeline. The interior of the general store was indeed warmer, and Mr. Henderson, a kindly man in his 60s with white whiskers and a potbelly, waved her toward the back room when he saw her. "Sit by the stove, girl. You look half frozen." "Lord knows I should not have sent you out there at such an hour, but I did not expect the morning to turn so eventful." He handed her a tin cup of hot coffee, which she accepted gratefully. "Was that Yates Morgan I saw you talking to?" "Yes, sir. He lent me his coat." "Good man, that one," Henderson said approvingly. "Works harder than any 3 men I know. Been on his own since he was 17, making his way by sheer grit and honest labor. His family came out west when he was just a boy, but fever took his parents and his little sister during the first winter. He survived by taking any work he could find. Now he is the top hand at the Double M Ranch, and old man Mitchum trusts him with everything." Theresa absorbed this information quietly, warming her hands on the coffee cup. There was something about Yates Morgan that had reached past her carefully constructed walls, those defenses she had built to survive in a world that was rarely kind to young women alone. Perhaps it was the straightforward way he had helped her, expecting nothing in return. Or perhaps it was the loneliness she had glimpsed in his eyes, a loneliness that matched her own. The morning passed in a blur of customers coming in to discuss the robbery and stock up on supplies. Theresa worked mechanically, measuring flour and sugar, fetching canned goods from high shelves, wrapping purchases in brown paper. But part of her attention remained focused on the front window, watching for a tall figure in a sheepskin coat, before remembering that she was wearing it. It was past noon when Yates returned, the winter sun casting long shadows across the dusty street. Theresa was helping a rancher's wife select fabric for a new dress when she saw him through the window, and her heart did an unexpected little jump in her chest. She finished with her customer as quickly as politeness allowed, then moved toward the door where Yates stood waiting, hat in hand. "I came back for my coat," he said, but his eyes were asking a different question entirely. Theresa reluctantly slipped out of the garment, feeling the loss of its warmth immediately. But more than that, she felt the loss of something intangible, some connection to this stranger who had shown her unexpected kindness. She held it out to him, their fingers brushing as he took it. "Thank you," she said softly. "You may have saved my life." "That seems a bit dramatic," Yates replied, but there was a pleased flush on his cheeks. "Though I admit I am glad I came along when I did." They stood there for a moment, neither quite willing to end the encounter. Mr. Henderson, watching from behind the counter with the shrewd eyes of a man who had spent decades observing human nature, called out, "Morgan, you staying in town tonight?" "I had planned to, yes, sir." "Roads are not safe to travel alone after dark, not with those robbers still loose." "Then you should come to dinner at my house this evening. My wife always makes too much food, and Theresa here boards with us. It is the least we can do to thank you for your kindness this morning." Theresa felt her cheeks heat up. Henderson was matchmaking, as subtle as a bull in a china shop, but she found she did not mind as much as she probably should. When Yates looked at her with a question in his eyes, she managed a small nod. "I would be honored," Yates said. "What time should I arrive?" 6 o'clock. "We live above the store, entrance around the side." After Yates left, Henderson grinned at Theresa like a cat with cream. "Before you scold me for meddling, consider that you have been in Winslow for 3 weeks and have not smiled once until today. A young woman needs more than work and sleep to truly live." Theresa wanted to protest, but she could not deny the truth of his words. She had been merely surviving, not living, keeping her head down and her heart locked away. But something about Yates Morgan had slipped past her defenses with the simple gesture of offering his coat. The afternoon dragged interminably. Theresa found herself checking her reflection in every shiny surface, dismayed by what she saw. Her dark blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her dress was faded and patched in several places, and she looked thin and worn despite being only 19. She had nothing suitable to wear for dinner, nothing that did not make her look like the penniless orphan she essentially was. Mrs. Henderson, a plump woman with kind eyes and graying brown hair, found her sitting on her bed in the tiny attic room that served as her quarters, staring hopelessly at her meager possessions spread on the quilt. "Child, what is wrong?" "I have nothing to wear," Theresa admitted, feeling foolish for caring so much. "Everything I own looks like rags." Mrs. Henderson studied her for a moment, then disappeared into her own bedroom. She returned carrying a dress of deep green wool, simple but well made and far finer than anything Theresa owned. "This was meant to be a Christmas gift for my niece, but she is a year younger than you and 2 inches taller. It never fit her properly. I think it will suit you beautifully." "I cannot accept this," Theresa protested weakly. "You can and you will. Consider it an early payment of wages if that makes you feel better." Mrs. Henderson laid the dress on the bed, then added with a sly smile, "Besides, Yates Morgan is a good man, and good men are rare as hen's teeth out here. If you have caught his eye, it would be a shame not to give it a proper chance." An hour later, Theresa descended the narrow stairs feeling like a different person. The green dress fit her perfectly, bringing out the color of her eyes, which were an unusual shade of hazel that shifted between green and gold depending on the light. Mrs. Henderson had helped her restyle her hair into a softer arrangement, with a few curls framing her face. She felt pretty for the first time in longer than she could remember. Yates arrived precisely at 6 o'clock, dressed in clean trousers and a pressed shirt, his dark hair still damp from a recent bath. He carried a bottle of wine and a small bouquet of winter wildflowers that he must have ridden some distance to find, given the season and the sparse landscape. When he saw Theresa, He stopped in his tracks, and something flared in his eyes that made her breath catch. "Miss Theresa," he said, his voice rougher than before, "you look beautiful." Dinner was a warm, lively affair. Mrs. Henderson had indeed made too much food: roasted chicken with potatoes and carrots, fresh bread with butter, and an apple pie for dessert. The conversation flowed easily, helped along by Henderson's stories about the early days of Winslow and Yates's tales of working cattle drives across the territory. "The worst drive I ever did was 2 summers ago," Yates said, leaning back in his chair with a reminiscent look. "We were taking a herd to California, and halfway there we hit a dry spell like nothing I had seen before. We lost nearly a third of the cattle, and there were times I thought we would all die of thirst ourselves. I have never been so glad to see rain as when that storm finally broke." "Why do you do it?" Theresa asked. "The work sounds brutal." "It is," Yates agreed, "but there is something about that life that gets into your blood. The freedom of it, the open sky, the challenge of moving 1,000 head of cattle across hundreds of miles of wild country. And the pay is good enough that I have been able to save money, put some aside for the future." He met her eyes across the table. "A man cannot work cattle drives forever. Eventually, you need something more permanent. What would you do instead?" She found herself genuinely curious about this man, wanting to know everything about him. "I have been thinking about starting my own ranch, something small to begin with. There is good land to be had if you know where to look and have the capital to invest. It would be hard work, but it would be mine." There was a longing in his voice that resonated with something deep in Theresa's chest. After dinner, Henderson suggested that Yates walk Theresa around the block for some fresh air, a transparent excuse to give them time alone. Theresa grabbed a shawl, and they stepped out into the cold evening. The sky was ablaze with stars, millions of them scattered across the darkness like diamond dust, brighter than anything she had seen in the city. "I never get tired of this view," Yates said, tilting his head back to look at the heavens. "Makes you realize how small you are, how big the world is." "I find it comforting, actually," Theresa said. "All my problems seem smaller under a sky like this." They walked in companionable silence for a few minutes, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. Finally, Yates spoke again. "Henderson mentioned you came from St. Louis. Do you miss it?" "No," Theresa said immediately, then amended. "I miss what it represented, I suppose, stability, family. But the reality of my last year, there was not something worth missing." "What happened, if you do not mind my asking?" Theresa took a deep breath. She had not told anyone in Winslow her full story, but something about the darkness and the stars and this man beside her made her want to share the truth. "My mother died when I was 16. It was just my father and me after that, and he took it hard. Started drinking, gambling, trying to fill the void she left. Within 2 years, he had gambled away everything we owned. He died last November, drank himself to death, and the men he owed money to came looking for payment. They suggested I could work off the debt in one of the saloons downtown." Yates stopped walking, his hand coming to rest on her arm. Even through the shawl, she could feel the warmth of his touch. "Did they hurt you?" "No. I ran before they could. A kind woman at my church gave me enough money for a train ticket west and told me to make a new life. So I came here where nobody knows me or my father's debts." She looked up at him, needing him to understand. "I am not running from the law or anything criminal. I just wanted a fresh start." "We all deserve that," Yates said quietly. "I understand better than you might think. When my family died, I was young and alone and had nothing. There were people who tried to take advantage of that, who thought a boy of 17 would be easy prey. I had to become hard fast, had to learn to fight and work and survive." It took me years to learn that being hard all the time was just another way of being dead. What changed? I met someone who showed me kindness when I did not deserve it. Old man Mitchum gave me a job when I was at my lowest, trusted me when I had given him no reason to. It made me realize that the world has good people in it too, not just the bad ones. He turned to face her fully, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders. This morning, when I saw you shivering in those thin clothes, looking so lost and cold, something in me just knew I had to help. And now, after spending this evening with you, I want to help you with more than just a coat. Theresa's heart was pounding. What do you mean? I mean that I am 27 years old, and I have been alone for 10 years. I have built a good reputation, saved money, made plans for the future. But all of that feels empty without someone to share it with. He took a deep breath. I know we just met, and this is going to sound crazy, but I feel something when I am with you, a connection I have not felt with anyone else, and I think maybe you feel it too. I do, Theresa whispered, hardly able to believe she was admitting it. But Yates, we have known each other for less than a day. People will think we are insane. Let them think what they want. This is the West, Theresa. People make fast decisions out here because life is uncertain and short. When you know something is right, you do not waste time second-guessing. He cupped her face gently in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. Wear my coat today, wear my name tomorrow. Marry me, Theresa Jane. Let me give you the stability and family you lost. Let me build that future I have been dreaming about with you by my side. The sensible part of Theresa's brain was screaming that this was madness, that you could not possibly know you wanted to marry someone after one day. But her heart, that battered, cautious heart that had been locked away for so long, was singing a different tune. She thought about the way Yates had looked at her this morning, the immediate kindness he had shown. She thought about his stories at dinner, the way he listened when she spoke, the loneliness in his eyes that matched her own. She thought about the life she had been living, just surviving day to day with no hope of anything better. Yes, she said, the word coming out strong and sure. Yes, I will marry you. Yates let out a breath that might have been relief or joy or both, and then he kissed her. It was gentle and sweet and full of promise, and Theresa felt something inside her chest crack open, letting in light for the first time in years. They returned to the Hendersons' apartment holding hands, and when they announced their engagement, Mrs. Henderson cried happy tears while her husband fetched the good brandy for a toast. Plans were made immediately, because that was how things worked in the territories. The local minister could perform the ceremony in 3 days, giving them time to obtain a license and make basic preparations. You will need a proper dress, Mrs. Henderson declared. We have that cream-colored silk that has been sitting in the store for months. Nobody in town can afford it, but it would be perfect for a wedding. I cannot afford it either, Theresa said quietly, hating to admit her poverty but unwilling to start her marriage with dishonesty. Consider it a wedding gift, Henderson said gruffly. You have been a good worker, girl, and you deserve some happiness. Yates squeezed her hand. I need to ride back to the ranch tomorrow and give notice. Mitchum will understand, but I owe him the courtesy of explaining in person. I will return the day after tomorrow with my savings and my belongings, and we can start looking at land. The next 2 days passed in a whirlwind. Theresa worked her final shifts at the general store while Mrs. Henderson took over the wedding preparations with the enthusiasm of a general planning a campaign. The cream silk dress was altered to fit Theresa's slender frame, and a local woman who was skilled with a needle added delicate embroidery to the bodice. Word spread through the small town about the quick engagement, and while there were certainly raised eyebrows and speculation, most people seemed genuinely happy for the couple. Yates returned as promised, riding into town at sunset with his possessions packed in saddlebags and a leather pouch heavy with his life savings. He had sold his horse to Mitchum for a fair price and given notice that he was leaving the ranch to start his own operation. Mitchum had apparently been supportive, even offering advice about available land and suppliers who would give a new rancher a fair deal. That evening, Yates and Theresa walked out to the edge of town where the desert stretched endlessly under a sky painted orange and purple by the setting sun. They sat on a large boulder, shoulders touching, talking about their hopes and dreams for the future. "I have been thinking about where we should look for land," Yates said. "There is a valley about 20 miles north of here, good grass and a reliable water source. The land is affordable because it is remote, but that also means more space and fewer neighbors. We could start small, maybe 50 head of cattle to begin with and build from there." "I know nothing about ranching," Theresa admitted, "but I am willing to learn. We will learn together." "It will not be easy, Theresa. The work will be hard and there will be times when money is tight, but we will have each other, and that makes all the difference." He pulled something from his pocket, a simple gold band that gleamed in the fading light. "This was my mother's wedding ring. I have carried it with me for 10 years, not sure why I kept it, but now I think maybe I was saving it for you." Theresa felt tears sting her eyes as Yates slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. "It is beautiful." "You are beautiful," Yates said, and kissed her again, longer this time, with a passion that made her toes curl in her boots. The wedding took place on a bright, cold morning 3 days after they had first met. The small church was packed with townspeople, most of whom Theresa barely knew but who had come out to witness the union and celebrate with the newlyweds. She wore the cream silk dress with her hair arranged in an elegant updo, and she carried a bouquet of winter roses that must have cost Yates a small fortune. When she walked down the aisle and saw Yates waiting for her at the altar, dressed in a new black suit with his hair neatly combed and his eyes shining with emotion, she knew with absolute certainty that she was making the right choice. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was met with applause and cheers. The reception was held at the town hall, with food and drink provided by various community members who had taken the young couple to their hearts. Theresa danced with her new husband, his arms strong around her waist, and felt a happiness so pure and intense it was almost painful. "Are you happy?" Yates murmured against her ear as they swayed to the music. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she answered honestly. That night, they consummated their marriage in a room at the boarding house, and Theresa discovered that physical intimacy could be tender and passionate and beautiful when it was with someone you loved. Yates was patient with her inexperience, guiding her gently, and by the time dawn light began to filter through the curtains, they had learned each other's bodies with thorough attention. The next week was spent in careful planning and preparation. Yates and Theresa rode out to the valley he had mentioned, and she fell in love with it immediately. The land was indeed beautiful, with rolling hills covered in winter brown grass that would turn green in spring, and a creek that ran clear and cold through the center of the property. They found a spot on a gentle rise that would be perfect for building a house, with views in every direction and protection from the worst of the weather. Yates negotiated the purchase of 160 acres, using most of his savings as a down payment and arranging terms for the rest. It was a gamble, investing everything they had in land and cattle, but it was a gamble they were willing to take together. Building their home became a community effort. Neighbors they had not even met came to help raise the structure, a simple 4-room house with sturdy walls and a good roof. Theresa worked alongside the men, hauling water and preparing meals, learning the names and faces of the families who would be their neighbors. By the end of February, they had walls and a roof, a fireplace that drew properly, and glass windows that let in light while keeping out the cold. Their furniture was sparse, mostly rough-hewn pieces that Yates built himself during the evenings while Theresa sewed curtains and made their bed with quilts donated by the church ladies. It was not fancy, but it was theirs, bought with honest work and built with their own hands. In early March, they purchased their first cattle, 30 head of mixed-breed cows and 1 young bull, from a rancher who was selling off part of his herd. Yates was in his element, evaluating the animals with a practiced eye, negotiating a fair price, and driving them back to their new home with Theresa riding beside him. "This is really happening," she said, watching the cattle spread out across their land, grazing peacefully. "This is really happening," Yates agreed, pulling her close. "We are ranchers now, Mrs. Morgan." The next few months were a period of intense learning and adjustment. Theresa had never worked so hard in her life, but she had also never felt more satisfied. She learned to milk cows, tend chickens, plant a vegetable garden, and cook meals over an open fire. Yates taught her to ride properly, and soon she was confident enough to help him move cattle and mend fences. They worked from dawn to dusk, fell into bed exhausted every night, and woke each morning to do it all again. But they were building something together, something solid and lasting, and that made every aching muscle and blister worthwhile. Summer arrived with blazing heat, and they learned new challenges. Water had to be carefully managed, animals had to be moved to find adequate grazing, and they both had to adjust to working in temperatures that sometimes exceeded 100 degrees. Theresa learned to rise before dawn to do the hardest work before the sun reached its peak, and to take a siesta during the hottest part of the afternoon. One evening in late July, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of crimson and gold, Theresa realized her monthly courses were late. She had been so busy that she had barely noticed, but now, counting back, she was nearly 3 weeks overdue. She placed a hand on her still flat stomach, wonder and fear mingling in her chest. "Yates," she said quietly, "I think I might be pregnant." He turned to her, his eyes wide. "Truly, I am not certain yet, but all the signs point to it." A slow smile spread across his face, transforming it from handsome to radiant. "A baby. We are going to have a baby." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "Are you scared?" "Terrified," she admitted, "but also happy. I know it will be hard, but I want this, Yates. I want a family with you. We will manage," he promised. "Whatever it takes, we will figure it out together." The pregnancy was confirmed by a midwife from town a few weeks later, with the baby expected to arrive in early March. Theresa continued to work as much as she could, though Yates became increasingly protective as her belly grew. They spent the winter preparing for their child, with Yates building a cradle from polished pine, and Theresa sewing tiny clothes from soft fabric. Their first winter as married couple tested them in ways they had not anticipated. A blizzard in January trapped them in the house for nearly a week, and they lost 2 cows to the cold despite their best efforts. Money was tight, and there were nights when Theresa lay awake worrying about whether they would make it through. But Yates never wavered in his determination or his love for her. He held her when she cried from hormones and exhaustion, rubbed her swollen feet, and told her stories about the future they would build for their child. And gradually, winter loosened its grip and gave way to spring. The baby arrived on a warm evening in early March, 1884, almost exactly 1 year after they had purchased their land. The birth was long and difficult, and there were moments when Theresa thought she might not survive it. But the midwife was skilled, and Yates stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and wiping her forehead with a cool cloth. When their son finally entered the world with a lusty cry, Theresa sobbed with relief and joy. He was perfect, with a full head of dark hair like his father and long fingers that gripped tight when she placed her hand in his tiny palm. "What should we name him?" Yates asked, his voice choked with emotion as he held his son for the first time. "Thomas," Theresa said. "Thomas Henderson Morgan, after the man who gave us both a chance." "Perfect," Yates agreed. Parenthood brought new challenges and deeper exhaustion than either of them had known possible. Thomas was a demanding baby, wanting to nurse constantly and rarely sleeping for more than 2 hours at a stretch. Theresa stumbled through her days in a fog of fatigue, trying to care for the baby and still manage her share of the ranch work. Yates stepped up in ways that surprised and touched her, taking the baby during the night so she could sleep, learning to change diapers and calm a fussy infant. He worked himself to the bone during the day while she rested, then came home to help with Thomas so she could prepare dinner. "I never knew I could love someone so much it hurts," Yates said one night watching Thomas sleep in his cradle. "Both of you. My whole world fits in this house." "We are lucky," Theresa agreed, leaning against his shoulder. "A year and a half ago I was alone and afraid with nothing to my name. Now I have a husband I adore, a beautiful son, and a home. It feels like a dream. If it is a dream, I never want to wake up." As Thomas grew, their lives settled into a new rhythm. Theresa learned to work with the baby strapped to her back in the style of the Apache women who sometimes passed through the area. The ranch slowly began to turn a profit as their cattle multiplied, and Yates developed a reputation for raising quality stock. They made friends among their neighbors, forming bonds that would last decades. There was the Patterson family 5 miles east, with 4 children who became playmates for Thomas as he grew. The Chens, Chinese immigrants who ran a successful horse breeding operation, taught them new techniques for managing animals. Old Sam Tucker, a former buffalo hunter who lived alone in a small cabin, became a frequent dinner guest and a surrogate grandfather to Thomas. Life was not always easy. There were droughts and floods, sick animals and broken equipment, days when the work seemed endless and the rewards too small. But through it all, Yates and Theresa faced each challenge side by side, their love growing deeper and stronger with each passing year. On their 2nd anniversary, Yates surprised her by taking her back to Winslow for the night, arranging for Mrs. Patterson to watch Thomas. They stayed at the boarding house where they had spent their wedding night and danced at the town hall to the same musicians who had played at their reception. "Do you ever regret it?" Yates asked as they swayed together. "Marrying me so quickly, taking such a risk?" "Never," Theresa said firmly. "You gave me everything, Yates. Love, security, purpose, family. I would make the same choice 1,000 times over, even knowing how hard it would be. Especially knowing that the hard times have made the good times sweeter, and every single moment with you has been worth it." Thomas took his first steps just after his first birthday, toddling across the kitchen floor into his father's waiting arms. He was a happy, curious child, always getting into mischief but quick to laugh and generous with hugs. Watching Yates with their son, seeing the patience and love he showed, made Theresa fall in love with her husband all over again. By the time Thomas was 2, Theresa was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she knew what to expect, and her body was stronger from years of ranch work. Their daughter, Sarah, arrived in November 1886, a tiny thing with her mother's hazel eyes and a surprisingly loud cry for such a small baby. Thomas was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything. He would bring her toys, sing to her in his childish voice, and get upset when she cried. Watching her children together, Theresa felt her heart might burst from the fullness of it. The ranch continued to grow. By 1888, they had expanded their herd to over 100 head of cattle and had purchased an additional 80 acres adjacent to their original property. Yates hired a young man named Billy to help with the work, giving him a small salary and a place to sleep in the barn. Billy proved to be a hard worker and became part of their extended family, often joining them for meals and holidays. As the children grew, the house seemed to grow with them. Yates added 2 more bedrooms and a proper dining room, using lumber they could finally afford and techniques he had learned from their neighbors. Theresa planted fruit trees and expanded her garden until they were nearly self-sufficient in produce. Life in the Arizona Territory continued to change around them. The railroad expanded, bringing more settlers and increased commerce. Towns grew larger and more prosperous. But on their ranch, some things remained constant: the hard work, the closeness of family, the satisfaction of building something with your own hands. Thomas turned 5 in March 1889, and they sent him to school in Winslow, riding in with one of their neighbors who made the trip twice weekly. He was bright and eager to learn, coming home with stories about his teacher and the other children. Sarah, not to be left out, demanded that Theresa teach her letters at home, and soon both children were reading simple books. That summer brought one of the worst droughts in memory. The creek that ran through their property slowed to a trickle, then dried up completely. Yates and Billy hauled water from a spring 5 miles away, making multiple trips daily to keep the cattle alive. Theresa rationed their household water carefully, washing clothes only when absolutely necessary and reusing cooking water for the garden. Other ranchers were not so fortunate. The Patterson family lost nearly half their herd, and several smaller operations went under entirely. But the Morgans survived, thanks to Yates's careful planning and the reserve fund they had managed to build up during the good years. When the rains finally came in September, they stood in their yard and let the water soak them to the skin, laughing like children while Thomas and Sarah danced and splashed in the puddles. "We made it through another one," Yates said, pulling Theresa close despite their wet clothes. "We always do," she replied. "As long as we are together, we can survive anything." The years rolled on, bringing both joys and sorrows. Henderson died in 1891, a peaceful passing in his sleep that nonetheless left Theresa grieving for the man who had given her a chance when she needed it most. They named their third child, born in 1892, Henderson Morgan, in his honor. Mrs. Henderson sold the general store and moved to California to live with her niece, but she corresponded regularly with Theresa, delighting in news about the children and the ranch. Her letters always ended with the same phrase: "I knew the moment I saw you two together that it was meant to be." By 1895, the Morgan Ranch was one of the most successful operations in the area. They employed 3 full-time hands and took on additional help during cattle drives and branding seasons. Yates had become a respected figure in the community, known for his honesty and his skill with cattle. Theresa had developed a reputation for her healing skills, often being called to help neighbors with illnesses or difficult births. Thomas, now 12, was already showing signs of following in his father's footsteps, spending every free moment working with the cattle and learning the business. Sarah, at 9, was more interested in books and learning, declaring her intention to become a teacher. Henderson, at 3, was still too young to have firm ambitions, but he had his father's stubborn determination and his mother's kind heart. On a cool evening in October 1895, Theresa and Yates sat on their porch watching the sunset as they had done thousands of times before. The children were inside doing homework, and the ranch was quiet except for the distant lowing of cattle and the whisper of wind through the grass. "It has been 12 years, Theresa said, reaching for Yates's hand. 12 years since you gave me your coat and asked me to wear your name." "Best decision I ever made," Yates replied, bringing her hand to his lips. "You know, I think about that day sometimes. What if I had ridden into town an hour later? What if I had not noticed you shivering? What if you had said no when I asked you to marry me? But you did not, and I did not, and here we are. Some things are just meant to be, I think. We found each other at exactly the right moment when we both needed saving." "You saved me as much as I saved you," Yates said seriously. "I was just drifting before you, working hard but without real purpose. You gave me something to build for, something beyond just survival. You gave me a life worth living." Theresa felt tears prick her eyes, happy tears this time. "We gave each other that gift, and we keep giving it to each other every single day." Inside the house, they heard Henderson's young voice raised in protest about bedtime, and Sarah's patient attempts to negotiate for just a few more minutes. Thomas called for his mother, needing help with an arithmetic problem. Normal, domestic sounds that represented everything they had built together. "We should go help," Theresa said, but she made no move to rise, content to sit a few moments longer with her husband's hand in hers. "In a minute," Yates agreed. "Let me hold on to this perfect moment just a little bit longer." They sat there as the sky darkened and the first stars emerged. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life more wonderful than either had dared to dream. And when they finally rose to tend to their children and the thousand small tasks that made up their evening routine, they did so hand in hand, partners in everything, still and always in love. The years that followed brought the changes that time inevitably brings. The children grew, each developing their own personality and dreams. Thomas eventually took over more of the ranch operations, learning everything his father could teach him and developing innovations of his own. Sarah did indeed become a teacher, opening a small school on their property that served children from several neighboring ranches. Henderson, the surprise baby of the family, inherited his mother's healing touch and went on to study medicine, becoming one of the first doctors in the region. The Arizona Territory achieved statehood in 1912, and Yates and Theresa, now in their 50s, celebrated with champagne and dancing at a community gathering. They had become elders of their community, the couple whose love story was told to young people as an example of taking chances on love. "Do you remember," Theresa asked that night as they prepared for bed, "when we were young and thought 50 was ancient?" "I remember thinking I would never make it to 30, Yates replied with a laugh. "And yet here we are with grandchildren on the way and more gray hair than brown." "I would not trade a single gray hair," Theresa said, running her fingers through his silver-streaked locks. "Each one represents a year I got to spend with you." Thomas married in 1903, bringing home a bride named Alina who fit seamlessly into the family. Their first child, a boy they named Yates after his grandfather, arrived in 1904, followed by a daughter in 1906 and another son in 1908. Sarah married a schoolteacher from Flagstaff and had 3 children of her own. Henderson remained single longer, focused on his medical practice, but eventually married a nurse he met during his training. The ranch house expanded again to accommodate family gatherings, with Yates and Thomas building a large addition that could hold the entire clan for holidays and celebrations. These gatherings became the highlight of Theresa's year, seeing her children and grandchildren around a table groaning with food, hearing their laughter and stories, watching the love and respect they showed each other. "We did this," Yates would say at these gatherings, his arm around Theresa's waist as they surveyed their family. "We built this." "Yes, we did," she would agree, "with love and hard work and faith in each other." They celebrated their 30th anniversary in 1913 with a party that brought together people from 3 counties. The original cream silk wedding dress, carefully preserved, was displayed in the living room, and Theresa told the story of their whirlwind courtship to grandchildren who listened with wide eyes. "You married Grandpa after knowing him for only 3 days?" young Yates asked, incredulous. "I did," Theresa confirmed, "and it was the smartest thing I ever did." "But how did you know?" Sarah's oldest daughter wanted to know. "Sometimes you just know," Theresa explained. "When you meet someone who sees you, really sees who you are and loves you anyway, someone who makes you want to be brave and take chances, you do not let that person go. Your grandfather gave me his coat when I was cold, and in doing so, he gave me warmth that has lasted 30 years. As they aged, Yates and Theresa gradually transferred more responsibility to their children, though neither ever fully retired. Yates still rode out to check on the cattle well into his 60s, and Theresa still tended her garden and helped deliver babies when needed. They had slowed down, certainly, but they had not stopped living. On their 40th anniversary in 1923, the family threw an even larger celebration. By then, they had 12 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren, with more on the way. The ranch had expanded to over 500 acres and was now a joint operation run by Thomas and his sons, one of the most prosperous in the state. That evening, after the guests had gone home and the house was quiet, Yates and Theresa returned to their spot on the porch. They were both 70 now, their bodies bearing the marks of a lifetime of hard work, but their love was as strong as ever. 40 years, Yates mused. It does not seem possible. It goes by so fast, Theresa agreed. I still remember that first day like it was yesterday. You looked so concerned, this tall, handsome cowboy insisting I take your coat. You looked so lost and vulnerable, but there was something in your eyes that told me you were stronger than you appeared. I wanted to know you, to understand what had put that look in your eyes. And instead, you fell in love with me, instantly and completely. Yates reached for her hand, his grip not as strong as it once was but still steady. I have loved you every single day for 40 years, Theresa Morgan. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. And you are mine, she replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. Thank you for seeing me that day, for stopping and caring about a stranger who was cold. Thank you for saying yes to a crazy cowboy who proposed after 3 days. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out over land they had worked and loved for 4 decades. Inside the house, they could hear their family settling in for the night, the sounds of home and belonging that they had created together. In the years that followed, they remained active and engaged with their family and community, though age inevitably took its toll. Yates's joints grew stiff from decades of hard physical labor, and Theresa developed a slight tremor in her hands that made fine work difficult. But they faced these challenges as they had faced everything else in their life together, with grace, humor, and unwavering support for each other. They celebrated their 50th anniversary in 1933, during the depths of the Great Depression. Times were hard across the nation, but the Morgan family weathered the storm better than most, thanks to decades of careful management and diversification. The party was smaller than previous anniversaries, with money tight everywhere, but it was no less joyful. 50 years, Theresa said wonderingly, looking at the old photograph from their wedding day. We look like children in this picture. We were children, Yates replied. We grew up together, learned together, built a life together. Would you do it all again, knowing how hard it would be? Yates pulled her close, his arms still strong despite his 80 years. Without hesitation, every moment of hardship, every challenge we faced, every tear we shed, it was all worth it to have this life with you. You are my heart, Theresa. You always have been. As they entered their 80s, their pace slowed further, but their love never diminished. They spent long hours on their porch, holding hands and watching their family work the land they had pioneered. They told stories to their great-grandchildren about the old days, about the wild frontier and the hard work of building something from nothing. Yates passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1937, just after his 84th birthday. Theresa held his hand as he drew his last breath, whispering the words she had said so many times before. I love you. I love you. I love you. The funeral drew hundreds of people from across the state, all coming to pay their respects to a man who had lived with integrity and love. Theresa stood straight and strong beside his grave, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, a testament to the life they had built together. She lived another 5 years without him, cared for by her children and sustained by memories of their 54 years together. On cold days, she would sometimes pull out the old sheepskin coat Yates had given her that first day, now worn and patched but carefully preserved. She would hold it close and remember the warmth of his body, the kindness in his eyes, the absolute rightness of his proposal. Theresa Morgan died quietly in her sleep on a spring morning in 1942, exactly 80 years after her birth. She was laid to rest beside Yates in the family cemetery on the land they had loved, under a headstone that read, "Beloved wife, mother, and grandmother, she wore his name with pride." At her funeral, her oldest grandson, Yates II, told the story one more time, the story that had become family legend. My grandfather saw my grandmother shivering in thin clothes on a cold January morning in 1883. He gave her his coat and told her to wear his coat that day and wear his name tomorrow. She said yes, and from that one moment of kindness and that one leap of faith, all of us are here. We are the legacy of their love, the proof that taking chances on love can create something that lasts beyond any lifetime. The Morgan Ranch continued to thrive for generations, passed down from parent to child, always with the understanding that it represented more than just land and cattle. It represented the power of love, the importance of kindness, and the truth that sometimes the best decisions in life are the ones that seem craziest at the time. And on cold winter mornings, when frost covered the ground and the wind howled across the Arizona high desert, family members would sometimes look out and think they saw two figures on the old porch, sitting close together, holding hands and watching the sunrise over land they had claimed with their courage and kept with their love. The story of the cowboy who gave his coat and the woman who gave her heart had become part of the landscape itself, woven into the very soil and stone, a reminder that true love, once found, never really ends but continues in the lives and hearts of those who come after. The children and grandchildren kept the story alive, telling it at weddings and family gatherings, using it as an example of what real love looked like. They spoke of how Yates had seen Theresa shivering and had not hesitated to help, how he had looked past her worn clothes and desperate circumstances to see the woman she truly was. They spoke of how Theresa had been brave enough to take a chance, to trust a stranger and leap into an unknown future. And they spoke of the 54 years that followed, years filled with hard work and hardship, certainly, but also with laughter and love and the deep satisfaction of building something meaningful. Years that had transformed two lonely, struggling individuals into the foundation of a dynasty. the root of a family tree that would spread and flourish for generations. In 1983, exactly 100 years after that cold January morning, when a cowboy gave his coat to a shivering stranger, the Morgan family held a centennial celebration. Descendants came from across the country, over 200 people who could trace their lineage back to Yates and Theresa. They gathered on the original ranch land, though the house had been rebuilt and modernized many times over the decades. The oldest living descendant, Sarah's daughter, who was now 93, stood before the crowd and held up the sheepskin coat, still preserved in a special case. "This coat," she said, her voice wavering but strong, "represents everything our family stands for: kindness, courage, love. My grandfather gave this to my grandmother when she had nothing, expecting nothing in return. And she gave him something even more precious in return: her trust, her love, her life. From that exchange came all of us. So let us never forget what they taught us about what truly matters." The coat was donated to the Arizona Historical Society that day, where it remains on display as a symbol of frontier romance and the power of human connection. Beside it hangs a copy of the photograph from Yates and Theresa's wedding day, and a plaque that tells their story in brief. Thousands of visitors see it every year, and many leave touched by the tale of two people who took a chance on each other and created a legacy that endured. But for the Morgan family, the real legacy was not in a museum display or even in the continued success of the ranch. The real legacy was in the values that Yates and Theresa had passed down through generations. The importance of kindness to strangers, the courage to take chances on love, the determination to work hard and build something lasting, and the understanding that true wealth was not measured in land or money, but in the strength of family bonds and the depth of love shared. Their story lived on in the way their descendants treated each other and the world around them, in the kindness they showed to those in need, in their willingness to take chances on love even when it seemed illogical or risky. Every marriage proposal in the family was accompanied by the telling of the original story, a reminder that the best love stories often begin with the simplest acts of human compassion. And so, though Yates and Theresa had been gone for decades, they remained present in the lives they had touched and the family they had created. Their love had been the seed from which a mighty tree had grown, providing shelter and sustenance for generations. It was a testament to the truth that one moment of genuine connection, one act of selfless kindness, one leap of faith into love, could ripple outward through time in ways impossible to fully measure or understand. The story of the cowboy who saw a woman shivering and gave her his coat, who asked her to wear his name tomorrow, and the woman who was brave enough to say yes, became more than just a family story. It became a legend, a reminder to all who heard it that love, real love, the kind that lasts and grows and creates something beautiful, often begins in the most unexpected ways, in the simplest moments of human kindness and connection. And that such love, once kindled, never truly dies but burns on through the ages, warming the hearts of all who come after.